Billionaire Richard Harlow had never imagined that his life of luxury and control could lead him here, a dense, dark forest where every step seemed to pull him deeper into the unknown. Lost, alone, and far from the comforts of his mansions and boardrooms, he realized that money could not buy a way out. Richard Harlow was a man the world admired, a billionaire investor, owner of grand estates, and a face often seen in glossy magazines. He had everything: power, wealth, and respect. Yet beneath the shine of his empire, Richard carried a heavy emptiness. The constant boardroom battles, the sleepless nights, and the noise of endless demands had drained him. What he craved most was silence. That was why he chose the forest. Far away from the glass towers of his city, tucked deep in the northern mountains, lay a retreat said to be untouched by time. The villagers called it pure and healing. To Richard, it sounded like exactly what he needed, a place where no phone would ring and no contracts would demand his signature. The driver dropped him at a wooden cabin and promised to return in 3 days. Richard insisted on solitude. He wanted no staff, no assistants, just himself and the wild. For a while, it was perfect. The air felt sharper, cleaner than anything he had breathed in years. The birds sang. The trees swayed. The forest seemed endless, alive with mystery. Curiosity tempted him. After placing his luggage inside the cabin, Richard decided on a short walk. The trail behind the house looked welcoming, and he told himself he would not go far. With his hands in his expensive coat pockets, he wandered deeper, inhaling the scent of pine and earth. But soon the path vanished. Every tree looked the same. Every turn led to more shadows. He frowned, glancing back, expecting to see the cabin roof, but nothing was there. Only walls of green stretched endlessly. He pulled out his phone. No signal. He tried to laugh it off. "It's fine. I'll find my way." Yet with each step, the forest grew darker, and a strange sound followed him. A shuffle, a crack, footsteps that were not his own. For the first time in years, Richard Harlow felt powerless. He was lost. Richard Harlow's heart raced as the forest seemed to close in around him. What had begun as a peaceful walk now felt like a trap. Every tree looked identical. Every shadow seemed to shift when he wasn't looking. The air, once fresh and crisp, now carried a strange heaviness, as if the forest itself was watching him. He tried retracing his steps, but the path was gone. The ground was soft and uneven, and the faint sounds of the woods grew louder. Twigs snapping, leaves rustling, and faint whispers carried by the wind. Richard told himself it was his imagination. After all, he was a rational man, a billionaire used to controlling every environment he entered. Yet even he could not control this. The sun dipped lower, casting long, twisting shadows. The forest no longer felt welcoming. His polished shoes sank slightly into damp soil, and his expensive coat, once a symbol of elegance, now seemed ridiculous and heavy. The thought that money could solve anything mocked him. Here, it could not buy safety, direction, or survival. Then came the first real sign that he was not alone. A flash of movement, a dark shape slipping behind a tree, made him freeze. He spun around, eyes straining in the dim light. Nothing, just trees, endless and silent. A laugh bubbled nervously in his throat, but he swallowed it down. Rationality fought panic, but panic was winning. Richard remembered an old village legend he had heard at the inn before arriving. The forest is alive. It tests pride, punishes those who think they are above it. At the time, he had smiled, thinking it quaint folklore. Now he shivered. Perhaps there was truth in it. He forced himself to move forward, telling himself he would find the cabin or a recognizable trail. Each step felt heavier than the last. The whispers grew clearer, faint syllables that almost sounded like words, but always vanished when he tried to listen closely. His pulse hammered in his ears. The forest was no longer just trees. It was a maze with eyes, a living labyrinth that rejected him at every turn. Richard realized something chilling. In the city, he had been untouchable. Here in the horror forest, he was just a man, alone, vulnerable, and afraid. The forest was no longer silent. Richard Harlow's steps grew uneven as the forest thickened. The shadows had become almost tangible, stretching like dark fingers between the trunks. Every rustle, every whisper made his heart hammer faster. He kept glancing behind him, though logic told him there was nothing there. Yet the feeling persisted. He was being followed. The temperature had dropped, and a damp chill settled over him. His suit, once a mark of sophistication, now soaked with sweat and dew, clung uncomfortably to his body. Each step brought a crunch of fallen leaves, and he realized that the forest seemed to echo his movements, amplifying even the smallest noise. The millionaire who had bargained, negotiated, and commanded respect in boardrooms now walked like a hunted man. Richard tried to reason with himself. It's just the wind, animals, nothing more. But the further he went, the less certain he became. Twigs snapped deliberately, not under his feet but somewhere ahead, then to the side. He caught glimpses of something moving, a shadow crossing between trees. But when he looked directly, there was nothing. Panic rose inside him. He fumbled for his phone again, praying for a signal. Still nothing. The bright screen that once connected him to the world now reflected only his pale, anxious face. Money and influence meant nothing here. His expensive watch, the gold cufflinks, even the fancy shoes, all useless. The forest seemed alive. The wind carried voices faint but chilling. "Leave, leave, leave," they seemed to whisper, brushing against his ears. Yet when he turned, nothing awaited him. His mind, unaccustomed to helplessness, began to falter. He stumbled over roots and fallen branches, heart pounding. The sun had disappeared completely, replaced by an oppressive darkness that felt as if it were pressing down on him. Every tree seemed to lean closer, forming a maze designed to trap him. Richard realized he could not rely on wealth, logic, or power. Survival depended on one thing now: courage. And even that felt dangerously thin. Somewhere deep in the shadows, the forest waited, patient and unyielding. Richard Harlow stumbled upon a clearing and froze. At its center stood a small, abandoned wooden cabin, barely visible through the thick undergrowth. Desperation overpowered caution. He needed shelter, warmth, and a place to gather his thoughts. The cabin door creaked as he pushed it open. Inside, the air was stale, heavy with the scent of damp wood and decay. Moonlight filtered through cracked windows, casting eerie shadows across the walls. On closer inspection, he saw them. Old carvings etched into the wood, faces twisted in fear, symbols he didn't recognize, and crude depictions of people wandering the forest. A chill ran down his spine. The whispers from earlier now seemed louder, echoing through the small space. "You are nothing. Nothing." The voice was distant, yet unmistakably clear. Richard's hand shook as he stepped further inside. Each floorboard groaned under his weight, each sound amplified in the oppressive silence. The millionaire who had once walked into boardrooms and dictated terms now felt fragile, small, and exposed. Here, in this cabin, his wealth meant nothing. His identity meant nothing. Then he saw it. A shadow moving outside the window, slow and deliberate. He turned quickly, but the figure vanished. Panic surged. The forest was no longer just a place. It was a predator, testing him, punishing his arrogance. Richard's mind raced. Every logical thought was drowned by fear. He realized he had been reckless, assuming nature could be tamed like a business deal. Pride had led him here, and now he faced the consequences. For the first time, he understood that survival demanded more than money, influence, or cleverness. It demanded humility, and perhaps courage he had never needed before. Richard Harlow sank to the damp floor of the cabin, shivering. Fear had drained him of energy, and the weight of isolation pressed down like a physical force. His expensive suit was soaked and torn from navigating the thick forest, and his polished shoes were coated in mud. For the first time in his life, he felt utterly powerless. He tried to steady his breathing, to think like the calculated man he had always been. But logic failed him. The shadows seemed to close in, the whispers circling around him like a storm. "You are small. You are alone," they hissed, echoing off the walls. Richard clenched his fists, yet even the act of defiance felt meaningless. Memories of his life flashed in his mind. Luxurious parties, boardroom triumphs, the endless chase for more. For decades, he had measured his worth in wealth and influence. And now, none of it mattered. Tears burned his eyes as he whispered aloud, "I'm just a man. I'm just a man." His voice cracked, vulnerable and raw. No assistant would answer him. No security team would rush to protect him. For the first time, he admitted the truth he had always avoided. He was human, fragile, and alone. As the words left his mouth, the forest seemed to pause. The wind stilled. The shadows, though still present, felt distant. In that moment, Richard realized that surrendering his pride did not mean defeat. It was the first step toward survival. He remained on the cabin floor, exhausted but awake, understanding for the first time that humility might be the only way out. Dawn's first light filtered through the broken windows of the cabin, casting a pale glow on Richard Harlow's exhausted face. The night had been relentless, filled with fear, uncertainty, and whispers that seemed to crawl under his skin. Yet in that quiet morning, a strange calm settled over him. He rose slowly, knees trembling, and stepped outside. The forest no longer felt like a predator. The shadows were still present, but they no longer pressed on him. The oppressive heaviness had lifted slightly, as if the forest recognized his change, the humility he had embraced in the darkness. Richard scanned the dense trees and noticed a faint trail glimmering in the soft morning light. It was barely visible, but it was a path, an invitation. With careful, cautious steps, he began following it, each movement slow but deliberate. Every step was a test of patience and courage. He reminded himself that pride had trapped him here. Now, only humility and determination could lead him out. The sounds of the forest were different in the morning. Birds sang, leaves rustled gently, and the faint wind seemed encouraging. Richard felt a strange gratitude toward the wilderness, an understanding that it had not been his enemy. It had been a teacher. Hours passed, but the trail persisted. Richard's muscles ached, and hunger gnawed at him. Yet a spark of hope had ignited within him. He realized that survival wasn't just about finding the way out. It was about embracing his own vulnerability, accepting fear, and moving forward despite it. With each step, Richard Harlow felt stronger. Not physically, but in spirit. The forest, once a horror, had transformed into a guide, leading him toward life, clarity, and a newfound respect for the world beyond wealth and power. Billionaire Richard Harlow finally emerged from the dense, shadowy forest as the morning sun began to rise, casting a warm golden light across the trees. Every step toward the forest's edge felt like shedding the weight of a lifetime. He collapsed onto the soft grass, gasping for breath, knees shaking and hands gripping the earth, the exhaustion and fear of the past days pressing down on him like a physical force. Not far away, villagers who had been searching for him spotted his figure and rushed forward, relief and concern etched on their faces. For the first time in decades, Richard did not think of wealth, fame, or status. All the mansions, luxury cars, and accolades that had once defined his life seemed utterly meaningless compared to the raw, simple gift of survival. The forest had stripped him of his pride, forcing him to confront his deepest fears and vulnerabilities. He had come face to face with his mortality, and it had changed him. The forest behind him, once dark and menacing, now stood quietly, almost reverently. Its shadows had receded with the morning light, leaving only the memory of the lessons it had taught him. Pride and arrogance had led him into its depths. Humility and courage had guided him out. Richard understood, with crystal clarity, that life could not be measured by wealth or power. True value lay in resilience, gratitude, and the ability to respect forces far greater than himself. Rising to his feet with the villagers' help, Richard looked back at the endless green expanse. A wave of gratitude surged through him, not only for being found, but for the experience that had reshaped his soul. He had learned to embrace fear, accept vulnerability, and respect the delicate balance of life. From that day onward, Richard Harlow lived differently. He continued his business ventures, but with a renewed sense of purpose and perspective. Simple moments, human connection, and the fragile beauty of life became his true treasures. The millionaire who had once measured success in billions now measured it in courage, humility, and gratitude. Lessons gifted by a forest that had nearly consumed him, but ultimately set him free.